This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, going Rabbi Sai. So we can continue and hopefully finish up briefly the sugya of what is called Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. So briefly, Tosfos in Masechta Sukkah is discussing an interesting sugya where the Gemara is darshaning the pasuk Chag HaSukkos Ta'asa Lecha. What do we learn from the pasuk Chag HaSukkos Ta'asa Lecha? The Gemara says to teach that a stolen sukkah is no good. Okay? Back Tosfos. Why do I need a pasuk to teach me a stolen sukkah is no good? Why don't we say very simply that a stolen sukkah is no good for the same reason a stolen lulav is no good? And that is Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. The Gemara on Daf Chavtes Beis on Daf Lamed says that we learn out that a esrog is pasol even after the first day if it's stolen, because we darshan v'havesem gazo v'yesa piseach v'yesa choyla. Stolen is compared to crippled and sick, just like crippled and sick cannot be brought as a carbon, so too something stolen cannot be brought as a carbon. And if it can't be brought as a carbon, the Gemara says it can't be used for a lulav. Well, if it can't be used as a lulav, presumably it can't be used for a sukkah either. Okay, and therefore the question is, why do I need a pasuk that a sukkah gezula is no good? Of course it's no good because Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. Now Tosfos himself answered that Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera is only a psul d'Rabbanan. Comes along the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'asa Lecha and says that the stolen sukkah is pasul even mid'oraisa. Now we pointed out Rabbeinu Tam in Tosfos on Daf Tes says that Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera is also a psul mid'oraisa. We also pointed out that Tosfos in Masechta Sukkah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph also seems to say that Sukkah Gzula is a psul mid'oraisa. So that's why the answer of Tosfos is not definitive, because there are Rishonim who say that Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera is a psul d'oraisa. Then we spoke out the answer the Ritva gives from a different Tosfos, and what was the Ritva's answer? That Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera only applies by specific mitzvahs. For instance, a carbon oila, because a carbon oila is coming to be meratzeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's coming to appease Hashem. It's trying to elicit a certain agreement and desire that we're trying to elicit from Hashem, and therefore, if you're trying to do so with an item which is stolen, you're not going to accomplish that task, and therefore only a carbon oila which is stolen is no good, and therefore only a lulav, which the purpose of the daled minim is to try to appease Hashem to make it rain. However, when it comes to sukkah, which is just a dry mitzvah, you're not trying to appease Hashem, you're just trying to fulfill a mitzvah. A stolen sukkah would work, and that's why I need the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'asa Lecha. The Ritva rejected that. Why did the Ritva reject that? Because the Ritva quoted a Yushalmi, and the Yushalmi in Psachim says that matzah gezula is you can't make a bracha on it, and the Gemara there in the Yushalmi in Parak Aleph Halacha Hey of Masechta Chala, Parak Yud Gimel, Halacha Gimel of Masechta Shabbos says, we learn out from Eilah HaMitzvahs that stolen matzah is not good. Why not? But you're not eating matzah to be meratzah Hashem. From here we see Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera would apply by all mitzvahs, and also by the mitzvah of Sukkah as well. So that was the kasha on the Ritva. Right? That was the kasha on the Ritva. Let's go back to Tosfos. Okay, let's go back to Tosfos. Tosfos, we spoke at the answer of the Minchas Chinuch. Let's just say very briefly what the answer of the Minchas Chinuch was. Minchas Chinuch's answer was that for the first day of Sukkot, ein chanami. Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera would say that you're not mekayim the mitzvah, and therefore, if you're not mekayim the mitzvah, you're an avarian, because you have to eat in the sukkah the first night of Sukkot. But after the first night of Sukkot, no Jew has to eat in the sukkah. It's just that if you're going to eat, you better not do it outside of the sukkah. But if technically I could not eat, and I'm a good guy, maybe I'm not mekayim the mitzvah, but I'm not an avarian, I'm not violating anything. So had it just been for Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera, then after the first night of Sukkot, okay, Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera would say, I'm not getting the positive fulfillment of the Mitzvah of Sukkah. However, I'm not an Avarian because I'm eating in the Sukkah. I am not going to get credit for it in Shemayim. I don't have to get credit for the Mitzvah in Shemayim. No, I can't. No, I can't. But had it just been for Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera, so then, you're right, I would not be allowed to make a bracha, but I would not be an avarian. I would not be a flagrant violator of the Torah. Comes the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh, comes the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh, and it says that after the first night of Sukkot, if I'm not sitting in a sukkah, the chefza of the sukkah is pasal. It's not only the man does not get the fulfillment of the mitzvah, it's not only the person is not fulfilling the mitzvah, it's that the sukkah is inherently disqualified, and therefore, after the first night of Sukkot, I'm eating out of the sukkah. I'm a flagrant violator. Fine. Before we get to the question on the Minchas Chinuch, let me speak out briefly two other nafkaminas, or two other answers to Tosfos' question, why I would need the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh and Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera would not be sufficient. Imagine the following scenario. I stole the schach, and then comes the first night of Sukkot, and I go over to the owner and I say, Reb Yid, I stole your schach. Are you meichel me? And he says, Machalach, Machalach, Machalach. Can I now sit in the sukkah? Yes, but there's a psul by sukkah of Tasav Eloi Min Ha'asoi. What's that psul? Psul is, if I have a tree over my sukkah, so sukkah's no good. Now let's say I cut the tree down. Sukkah's still not good. I have to lift up the schach and put it down. Because schach cannot become good after the fact. It has to be put there initially in a kosher status. It can't just be kosher after the fact. So therefore, if you chop down the tree, the sukkah is not kosher. Same thing is, let's say I stole the schach, and then I go to the guy, and the guy says, don't worry, machalach, just, chalk it up as your birthday present. Is it a kosher sukkah?
If you moved it, right?
If I don't move it.
You don't move it, no, it can't change the
Had it just been Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera, the sukkah was good the whole time. It's just I can't be yotzei with it. So I don't have to move it, because it's not a disqualification in the schach, it's a disqualification in my ability to fulfill the mitzvah. So once he's meichel me, now I can fulfill the mitzvah, and I don't have to move the schach. Comes the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh, and it says the schach is pasal, the chefza of the sukkah is pasal. It's inherently invalidated. If it's inherently invalidated, then I need to lift it up and put it back down. So that would be another answer to Tosfos' question. This is the answer quoted in the Zichron Shmuel. Zichron Shmuel are the Chiddushei Torah of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky. Shmuel Rozovsky was the highest Maggid Shiur in Panovich. In times of before Reb Shach even. Actually, I once spoke in Passaic, and there was a chashuv guy sitting there. His name was Rabbi Chiel Novik, and he came over to me. He said, "Oh, very nice shiur." And I asked him, "Who are you?" He's the Rosh Yeshiva in Ashdod. And then he tells me there's a nice Chiddush in the Zichron Shmuel. And then we were talking, and he wrote the Zichron Shmuel. He wrote the Sefer, the Chiddush of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky. I have it here inscribed to me. But anyway, Reb Shmuel Rozovsky in Siman Chavtes, this is real Yeshiva Shalamdos. He brings down from a Baruch Bar Leibowitz, that this is how he answered Tosfos' kasha. That the reason why I need Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh is, had it just been for Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera, the schach would be kosher, and if the guy's moichel, I don't have to touch the schach. Now they have a pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh, so now the schach is inherently pasol. There would be a psul of Taseh V'loi Min Ha'asoi. By the way, on the same note, there's a Biur Halacha in Hilchos Tzitzis, in Siman Yud Aleph. Let's say I stole wool, or I stole strings, and I put them in tzitzis. And then the owner is Michael. Tasav Eloi Min Ha'asoi applies to tzitzis as well, right? For instance, let's say I cut a beged. Let's say I have a four-cornered garment, and there are holes in the corners to put the tzitzis in. So I slit a diagonal slit in the beged. I slip in the tzitzis, and then I sew up the corner. Is that kosher? No. Because I didn't put it there, I didn't put it in a kosher beged. It was a puzzle beged, and then after the fact I made it kosher. So the Bir Halach has a suffix if you steal strings, and then the guy is meichel whether it's good or not. But assuming it's not good, that would be a reason why, because by the way, by tzitzis it also says, Gedilim ta'aseh lecha. So, fine. Then there's an answer of Chaim Brisker. And this answer we spoke at last week, I'll just say it very quickly. And that is, the halacha is 4 tvachim of schach pasal. I might have said 4 amos. If I did, I made a mistake. 4 tvachim of schach pasal renders a sukkah pasal. Because you can't use good asik anymore beyond 4 tvachim. Fine. Now let's say I have 2 tvachim of pasal schach and 2 tvachim of stolen schach. So if it would just be mitzvah habah ba'avera, the schach is kosher, I just can't be yotzei with it. Memela, the sukkah is still kosher because I have a lot of other kosher schach. But if, now that I have chag ha-sukkahs taselacha, so now the 2 tvachim of stolen schach is pasal schach, it would be mitzdarif with the other 2 tvachim of pasal schach, and now the sukkah would be no good. But here's the kasha on the Minchas Chinuch. This whole approach is assuming that mitzvah habah ba'avera is only the man's inability to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, but the sukkah is still kosher. And Reb Shimon Shkop asked the following question, and that is, in the Gemara in Masechta Sukkah, on Daf Lamed, the Gemara learns out that a stolen esroig is no good from the pasuk in Malachi, that it says, V'havesem gazol, you're going to bring a stolen carbon, v'yas hapiseach, a crippled carbon, v'yas hachoila, or a sick carbon. So the Gemara darshans, stolen, gazol, dumya, de piseach. Stolen, similar to cripple. Just like a crippled animal, there's no takana. There's no way to bring a crippled animal as a carbon. There's no way to bring a stolen animal as a carbon. So as for Shimon Shkop, Rosh Yeshiva of Grodno, that, one second, if we're comparing stolen to sick is not a man's inability to fulfill a carbon with a sick animal. The animal is inherently disqualified. A crippled animal is inherently disqualified. If we're comparing stolen to sick and cripple, that means stolen is inherently disqualified. The cheftza is invalid. Therefore, how could the Minchas Chinuch say that had it not been for the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Taselacha, you would not be an avarian on the second day of Sukkot? And in other words, and how could Rav Baruch Bar Leibowitz say that it's not a problem of Tasa V'loi Mina Asai? Because the sukkah is kosher, it's just you can't fulfill the mitzvah. No, it's not a valid sukkah, it's an invalid sukkah. If the source of stolen is, it's similar to sick and cripple is not, the man can't be yotze with it. Sick and cripple is, it's inherently not a valid item. So then it's inherently not a valid sukkah. And then if you would sit in it after the first day of Sukkot, you would be sitting outside of a sukkah. Meaning the whole premise of the Minchas Chinuch is that this, had it not been for the pasuk, the sukkah is good, you just can't get the mitzvah with it. But you see, you have to go back to the source. The source of mitzvah habah ba'avera is, it's similar to sick and cripple. Sick and cripple is an inherent flaw. So to stolen is an inherent flaw.
I don't understand that. If you have a sick or crippled animal, the chef itself, there's something wrong with it. In the physical entity of the animal, something wrong. But with an estrog, if it wasn't the fact that it was stolen, the estrog looks like a kosher estrog. It has all the milas of a kosher estrog.
You're right. And, so and that's exactly why the Minchas Chinuch said that mitzvah habah ba'avera is just the man's inability to fulfill a mitzvah with a perfectly valid item. However, the fact that the Gemara darshans a pasuk, Gazol, Piseach, Chigar, and the Gemara is saying Gazol has the same status as cripple and sick, that Jerusha tells you that this something stolen is inherently problematic. Meaning the fact that we make such a drasha of Gazol, Dumya, the Piseach, V'Chigar, that Jerusha is saying in the Be'enei Hashem, in the eyes of the Torah, this is inherently flawed. Something stolen is inherently flawed. By the way,
the animal maybe could never be fixed, right?
By the way, I'm sorry.
An estrog, if it was gazal, And the guy admits, and he goes and pays him for it.
I don't know. Maybe if you
change instead,
inherently fixed means as is. Maybe the animal will go to a PT, and go on the treadmill, put on a cast, and we'll get him back into shape. By the way, a similar idea that we're saying now that stolen is inherently flawed, we spoke out last week in a Chumash here. Do you remember we spoke about the idea that the Ramban asks a question on the animals of Avraham? The Ramban asks, why would Avraham have to muzzle his animals? Right. But the animals of Pinchas ben Yair would not eat tevel, so why would the animals of Avraham eat steal? Why would the animals of Avraham steal? Why would the animals of Avraham steal? So the Chassam Sofer had a question on that. Chassam Sofer asks, what are you talking about? There's a klal that Hashem only protects tzaddikim and their animals from something inherently flawed, like tarfus, like something which is treif. But Hashem wouldn't protect the tzaddik from eating before Havdalah or eating on Yom Kippur, because there the food is kosher, it's just the wrong time. So then why would Hashem protect... Who says Hashem would protect Avraham's animals from eating kosher food that might be stolen? And Rabbi Chanan said, no, maybe there's a difference. Eating before Havdalah, it's kosher food, just at the wrong time. Eating on Yom Kippur, it's kosher food at the wrong time. Stolen, the food itself is like toxic. The same thing we're saying over here. If it's stolen, the animal itself, the item itself is flawed. Okay, so basically, here's the breakthrough. We have two questions on the table right now. And they are, question number one is, question on the Minchas Chinuch. How could he say that had it not been for the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh Lecha, it would be a kosher sukkah? What do you mean? Like crippled and sick. So it's inherently flawed. Question number two is a question the Ritva asked on Tosfos. Tosfos wanted to answer. Tosfos said that Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera doesn't apply to Sukkah. It only applies to mitzvos that come l'ratzos. It only applies to mitzvos that are trying to appease Hashem. And the question of the Ritva is, but the Yushalmi says it applies to matzah, and matzah is not bal l'ratzos. So I'm going to tell you the genius Chiddush of Rav Aharon Kotler. And that is, there are two types of Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. There's one, because we could ask another question. Why do I need two sources for Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera? One source is the Havesem es ha-piseach v'es ha-choyla es ha-gozol v'havesem gozol v'es ha-piseach v'es ha-choyla. That's one source of Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. That the same way crippled and sick is no good, stolen is no good. And then you have the Yushalmi source, Eila ha-mitzvahs, that you have to do mitzvahs correctly, and if it's stolen, it's no good. Why do I need two separate drashas? Bavli Yushalmi. Says Rav Aharon Kotler, because there are two types of Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera. There's a Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera that we learn out from crippled and sick, and there's a Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera that applies by all mitzvahs. So why do I need two? That's because the Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera that we learn out from Havesem Gozol v'esapiseach v'esachigar, that's a Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera that's an inherent flaw with the mitzvah, just like a cripple and a sick. And that we learn out from Havesem Gazol v'esapiseach v'esachigar. And there, that type of Mitzvah Habah Ba'avera is an inherent flaw in the mitzvah. Not only do you not get credit, the item is no good.
But that wouldn't apply to the esrog, right? Because the esrog doesn't have an inherent flaw.
Yes, it does. It does. It's stolen. The drasha says that something which is stolen is inherently flawed. That's the drasha.
To me means there's something wrong.
That's muchach in the Gemara. The Gemara compares gazol to chayla and piseach. There's a second type of mitzvah habah ba'avera that we learn out from Eila HaMitzvahs, that if you don't do a mitzvah right, it's no good. But that type of mitzvah habah ba'avera only means that you're not mekayim the mitzvah, but the item is still good. So we could say like this. Says Rav Aharon Kotler, Tosfos is right. Tosfos had a kasha. That why do we say mitzvah habah ba'avera by sukkah? The answer is, it only applies by mitzvahs that habah l'ratzos. So the Ritva asks, what do you mean, but it applies by matzah? Oh, wait a second, Ritva. Avada, there is a mitzvah habah ba'avera that applies by matzah and applies by sukkah. But the mitzvah habah ba'avera that Tosfos was asking was the mitzvah habah ba'avera on daf lamed of dumya de piseach and chiger. And that's a mitzvah habah ba'avera that is an inherent flaw in the item. And a mitzvah habah ba'avera that's an inherent flaw in the item, it's only a problem if the mitzvah is balaratzois. We only say that the item is an invalid item if the mitzvah is coming to elicit a certain response from Hashem. Meaning the Gemara on daf, because we have two types of mitzvah habah ba'avera. We have one type learned out from Havesam Gazel v'yasa piseach v'yasa chiger v'yasa choila, and one type from Elah HaMitzvahs. Says Aharon Kotler, the type of mitzvah habah ba'avera that's learned out from Havesam Esa Gazel, that's a mitzvah habah ba'avera which is a psul in the chefts of the item. That type of mitzvah habah ba'avera is only if it's balaratzos. And therefore it applies by carbon oila. It applies by dal and minim. It's not going to apply by sukkah. Sukkah is not balaratzos. It's not going to apply by matzah. And that's why the Tosfos is correct in saying that when Tosfos asked, why don't we say mitzvah habah ba'avera by sukkah? Tosfos said it doesn't apply by sukkah. Sukkah is not balaratzos. The Ritva asked, well, we see it applies by matzah. No, only the second type of mitzvah habah ba'avera applies by sukkah and by matzah. And that is that the item is good. It's just the person doesn't get a fulfillment of it. So you'll ask, but still, at the end of the day, it's mitzvah habah ba'avera. So why do I need a pasuk? So what if only the second type of mitzvah habah ba'avera applies? The type that says I don't get the mitzvah. But why isn't that not enough? Why do I need a pasuk? Why can't I apply mitzvah habah ba'avera that says I don't get the mitzvah? That's where the Minchas Chinuch comes in, and the Minchas Chinuch says, if it would just be for a mitzvah, which is habah ba'avera, which says you don't get the mitzvah, then after the first day of Pesach, I wouldn't be of Sukkot, I wouldn't be an Avarian. And I need the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Tasalcha to say the item itself is pasal. Rav Shimon Shkop says, no, mitzvah habah ba'avera says the item itself is pasal. No, that's only a mitzvah habah ba'avera that's balaratzos, it says the item itself is pasal.
But if for a mitzvah that's not balaratzos, would the nafkamina here be that if there was something that was stolen, let's say an esrog, the fact that esrog now has an inherent flaw in it, if someone else came to use that esrog,
would not be good.
Didn't know if it was stolen. Didn't know that it was stolen. So if we say that that there's inherent flaw in the esrog by itself, nobody can get the mitzvah. But if we don't say it's an inherent flaw, then maybe the second person or the third person who didn't know would be actually yotzei with the mitzvah. The one who stole it could never be yotzei with the mitzvah.
That's another nafkamina. Yes. Good. Yes. But so what's our breakthrough? What's the point that we're saying? We have two questions, but the two questions really answer each other. One question was on the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch wanted to say that the reason I need a pasuk is to teach me that after the first day of Sukkot, the guy's not varyan, because mitzvah habah ba'avera is not a psul in the chefza, and the pasuk is. So Rav Shimon Shkop asked, but what do you mean? We learned from the pasuk Havesam Gazel v'esa piseach v'esa choila that mitzvah habah ba'avera is a psul in the chefza. So the answer to that question is, you're right, Rav Shimon Shkop. We do learn that mitzvah habah ba'avera is a psul in the chefza. But that mitzvah habah ba'avera never would apply by sukkah in the first place because sukkah is not balaratzos. The chefza disqualification of mitzvah habah ba'avera that we learn out from Havesam Gazel only applies by mitzvahs that are balaratzos. True, there is a second type of mitzvah habah ba'avera that applies by all mitzvahs, like we learn out from matzah, but that we have the Minchas Chinuch. That would not disqualify the item itself, and therefore I need a pasuk. Okay? So that's hopefully a wrap-up of the sugya of mitzvah habah ba'avera. And I already know, I got emails from Lakewood already. They wanted to know some of the marmakaimus of the sugya. So they know here in Queens we have real Lomdut. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.